Welcome to episode 4 of Free Advice from Your Uncle. I am Uncle Paul, and this is episode 4, as I just mentioned, and it is called Game On. And the reason that I chose this topic is because I have some friends who have kids who are wanting to go into the video game industry in their college majors. And, as parents, they're a little bit concerned because they're not necessarily gamers. And, I'm trying to reassure them that, it's a valid industry, as my two friends, very dear friends and guests will speak to today. Hopefully we'll give you some insight, but it's a huge industry. But before we get going, I work with these guys. These guys actually had the audacity or sympathy to hire me back at this small company called Digital Creators in Boulder, Colorado. It was my first technology job after I moved from Detroit out to Denver, and they gave me a shot. Both of these two gentlemen gave me a shot and hired me, and we became fast friends and longtime friends. That was, 20 years ago, right?
More, I think mid 90s.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it was
Maybe
yeah,
25.
98.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So it's been a while, and I have not seen these guys in person since I moved back to Michigan, which is sad because I've missed them and I love these guys to death. So they're great. So I'm going to introduce them. If you're looking at the recording that I have, in the upper left-hand corner is Scott Brown. And then Peter Grundy is in the screen below us here. And again, I'm going to just kind of introduce the context in terms of how I know them. I mentioned that they hired me back in, the late 90s. And I started a company called Formula Technologies. And after working at Digital Creators, it was bought out. And then Scott and Peter, and we affectionately call them Pizza. I'm sorry if I revert back to them, but there's a story behind that. We won't get into that. But, it's a great story. But so Scott Pizza had, started a video game company, and I think really a cutting edge. As I look back on it, Scott Pizza cutting edge in terms of what Jumpgate is the name of the video game was all about. It was a massively multiplayer, online, persistent universe that was space-based, and you mined asteroids. There's an economy. You could fight ships, you could upgrade your ships. I mean, it was really ahead of its time, and it was awesome. I missed that game. I wanted to dominate the universe financially there, but right. And so, and by the way, they gave us also some work when I started Formula Technologies, and our first credits in the video game industry as well, which is awesome and something I speak of with pride when I talk about the gaming industry. So, they've gone on to other things as well since then. And so I want to give each of them a chance to introduce themselves and talk about what they're currently doing, give some information about their companies and their projects, and then we'll jump into the video game topic that I wanted to cover tonight. So Pizza, since I introduced you second, I'm going to have you start us off and launch us here and just giving us an intro of yourself.
Okay.
Peter Grundy.
Thank you, Paul. It's good to see you again. And Scott. Don't get to see Scott too often either these days. I guess I started off doing digital artwork a little bit before I met Paul, actually. And Scott actually hired me at Digital Creators as a 3D graphic artist, and I really didn't know much about it, to be honest with you.
None of us did.
No, none of us did. But I was able to create some interesting 3D shapes and render them onto floppy disks. And I was able to show them to Scott, and he hired me, and I was the first hire there, and artist doing CD-ROM production. So we did that for several years. That's where we met Paul, and that company grew, and then it sold. And Scott went off and said, "Oh, I'm gonna make a video game company. You want to come?" I was going through some personal stuff at the time, and I'm like, "Sure, why not? I'll come." Yeah. So it took me a little bit of time to make that leap, of 3 or 4 months after he did, but. And I started doing 3D graphics. I was the only 3D graphics person at that company, and Scott was doing code, and our other partner, Steve. We made Jumpgate. And after that, we got another project. I won't steal all the thunder from Scott, so I'm sure he'll want to talk about some of these things, but we made a cart game massive multiplayer game, and then we went on to make a couple of others, and Lego Universe is the big one.
Yeah.
So that was NetDevil was the name of the company. We focused on massively multiplayer games. And I, having not really done any computer graphics, cut my teeth on doing 2D, 3D, how to integrate it into a game, even a little bit of game design, everything. I mean, we were jack of all trades at that point. So after NetDevil, we sold that company. I took a bit of a sabbatical because I didn't want to do anything to do with computers anymore, because it had been, was it 18 years, Scott? Or 50?
Something like that, yeah.
18 years running the company. So I took a bit of sabbatical and realized that I actually needed to still earn money. So I got an art director position at Direwolf Digital. They make computer card games. You guys probably heard some of the projects. They just came out with a new game called Root, which looks pretty fun. I haven't played it yet. So I did some AD work for them for about a year. And then I got a job at a company called Sphero in Boulder, where I was doing 3D and conceptual work for actually building robots, which was really cool. So we were doing 3D graphics and applications and games that interfaced with robots. So the last project I worked on, we built a robotic Lightning McQueen for the release of the movie.
Oh, nice.
So I was the lead on that by the time it was done. That was really cool.
Currently, what are you doing right now, Pete?
Currently,
anything you want to speak of?
Yeah, I can tell you where I'm at right now. I'm at a company called Shyfted. They were part of a company called Cadence, which does cybersecurity. So a couple of the people that I worked with at Sphero decided to go off and work for Cadence, and we started to build interactive. I wouldn't say games. They were more like the old stuff me and Scott used to make, almost CD-ROM educational stuff. We were trying to do a cybersecurity training. And then they decided that wasn't really what they wanted to do anymore. And so they kind of sold the whole team off to this other gal. And she has taken all of us, all 6 of that team, and we've built another game, a real game this time. Not just training, it's actually a game that whilst you play, it actually teaches you about cybersecurity. And so we just did a pitch on Friday to Microsoft, and they're going to buy a bunch of subscriptions. So
awesome. Congrats.
Yeah. And we've also sold, we don't know if we've got it yet, but it looks like we may have sold to a couple of government agencies for another bunch of subscriptions too.
Wow.
Nice.
Everybody that's played it said that it's really a fun game, which is really hard to do.
Yeah, right.
I'll probably talk about that, but like making a video game is not as easy as it sounds.
Well, especially with cybersecurity. I mean, it's not like the most robust content.
Right. Well, we just got the feedback from Microsoft today, and most of the responses were 9s and 10s.
Oh,
so
nice.
I've never seen anything like it, so we're pretty proud of it.
That's awesome. So, Pizza, before I move over to Scott, I want to just also talk a little bit about your educational background, right? So, you grew up on the island, right, in the motherland, and even though you struggle with across the pond, right?
Yeah.
And even though you struggle with the Queen's language a little bit, we forgive you. So, go ahead.
I've been here a long time, so
you have, and we love you. We love you. So. And again, we won't get into the discussion of what is the real football either, but so yeah, hey, there you go. We've won you over, hopefully.
Hey, soccer,
yeah. Oh, okay, good. So I've kind of fallen in love with the World Cup. I got to tell you, but so Pete, I want you to talk about your educational background because you have a Master's of Fine Art. Is that correct? Do I recall that correctly?
I have a BA in
BA. Okay.
Yeah, I have a BA in three-dimensional design.
Okay.
So I went to Brighton University. I did real art. I hated computers back then because computers were these massive machines that did little dots. And I was like, how can you consider that art? So I hated them. And when I came to, so I have a degree in three-dimensional design, which is more like furniture and pottery and all of that kind of stuff.
You did sculpting too, right? A lot of sculpting.
Yeah. I focused on wood carving and ceramic sculpture. So so I can draw, I can paint, I can do all of that kind of stuff. I wouldn't say that I'm the best, but I'm pretty well versed in a lot of different disciplines from that regard.
Well, I still have a
So,
Peter Grundy original, by the way, just so you know, and I proudly display it in my office. So
all right, that's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
So I took that education and I ran away
yeah.
and did nothing with it for 3 or 4 years. I became a dive master in the Cayman Islands, and I painted boats and logos and signs for shops while I was doing it. Came back to America, and when I came to America, I decided I was going to do art again. And so I started doing artwork for the advertising industry, and I made gigantic sculptures out of styrofoam to sell to the trade show industries. Because I had, that's what I was a sculptor, and I could do big stuff that nobody else wanted to do. So that was my training and my background. And I really didn't get into computer graphics until my dad, who's a doctor, said, hey, they can do pretty good medical imaging these days. I bet you could play around with that kind of technology and do some good graphics. And I fell into this, my real education on computer graphics came when I fell over this game called Doom. And found out that I could edit it and change all the graphics myself and make it look completely different. And then that's when I got hooked and started teaching myself how to do that stuff and teaching myself different 2D software programs. And then that's when I decided I would think I could try and do this for a living instead of trying to do giant sculptures, which was killing my back.
Yeah.
And I knew I could only make as many sculptures as I could make, right? Or as if I teamed up with someone else. And then that's when I went and got a job interview with Scott. And then Scott pretty much pushed me a lot into, doing more 3D graphics and really helping me understand the technology more. So
Scott's a real visionary, isn't he? Again, just with the, his whole vision for Jumpgate and just, I think also understanding people and working with them too. I give him a lot of credit for, that and just, managing personalities as well. So,
inspirational, I would call it. Anybody, I don't want to embarrass him, but anybody that would talk to you about the work for him would tell you that he makes his team be really inspired and interested in what they're doing.
He's one of the best people I've ever worked for. And again, I always bring up that, that experience at Digital Creators when you guys had NetDevil as well. So it's been, again, a pleasure, and appreciate the opportunities that he's provided me and you guys have. So I want to transition over to Scott here. And again, before we go into that, so Peter, the majority of your career, and Scott you both have made your living in video games, right? Would that be an accurate statement?
It is for the last 30 years. Yeah.
There you go.
30 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this was back before video games began. And I'll get into that in a second because I want to dive into Scott and just kind of cue him up here too. Scott and I think hit it off via sports when I started at Digital Creators too, because he went to University of Colorado. I was a huge Michigan fan, even though I graduated from Wayne State University, and we had that big rivalry back in the day, when we played each other, and it was a lot of fun. Scott was just an awesome, to work with there, and the Broncos were hitting their stride too. He's a huge Broncos fan. So Scott, I want to just kind of turn it over to you and tell us a little bit about your background and education and how you kind of got into the gig.
All right. Well, first, thank you guys for what you said. That was really nice.
All true.
So I've kind of wanted to make games my whole life. Not many kids do, but I think I was in grade school, 4th or 5th grade, and the school got its first Apple IIs. And, it had Oregon Trail. I mean, you remember those games, right?
Dr. J, Larry Bird.
Yeah. Lemonade Stand.
Yeah.
And I was hooked. I was like, this is it. How do you do this? How does it work? You know what I mean? And so I kind of taught myself programming growing up because most schools didn't really have programming courses yet. And if they did, they would have one, and then by the time I got to college, it was much more established. So I got a degree in computer science, but it took me a while because while I was in school, I sort of stopped doing the day thing, and I started full time at Digital Creators, and I finished my degree at night while I was was doing digital creators during the day. And man, we didn't know anything about anything. You know what I mean? It was like everything was learning on the fly.
Wild, wild west.
Yeah, I mean, we did, and stuff you should know, how to file taxes, how to, all these business things that, we never thought about, right? Like, so we kind of learned a lot of that stuff, made a bunch of mistakes. And then we were a little bit smarter, I think, when we started our company. But yeah, it was good times. I mean, it was the digital creators was the .com, right? Like, that was when we were, I can't even remember anymore. I think we went from 30 or 40 people to 150 in a year. And we were hiring
people's names. Yeah.
Yeah. We were hiring anyone. It was like, you don't have to have experience. You don't have to have anything. Like, we'll train you. Like, please just come work here,
Can you use Word and turn on a computer?
Right. At least one of those, right? Yeah. So, I mean, it was kind of funny. Like we learned a lot and did all of that. But so my education is computer science. But, with what we did, it's so many different skills, right? To be in the game industry, like there's programming and business and management, and just there's so many different parts of it. But yeah, I mean, Peter sort of described our NetDevil trip pretty well. It was just the three of us, and I think by the time we left, it was over 200, right, Peter?
Yeah, it was. By the time we finished Lego Universe. And
Yeah.
I want to point out, Scott glazed over NetDevil really quickly, but and we said we were all jack of all trades, which we were, but we started towards the end, we had people who was very specific in their skill set.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. The bigger you get, the more specific people's skills are. So it's kind of a good thing to know, maybe if you're thinking about getting in the industry, like if you really want to do just this one thing, then you're probably better to be at as big of a company as possible, because, right, like, I don't know if you played the game Horizon Zero Dawn, but I thought that game was just beautiful.
Yeah.
And as an example, there was one artist that worked on her hair for like over a year, right? You know what I mean? And so, like, if you really want to be focused, like, that's kind of what it's like at a big company. And if you sort of like doing everything, today you're doing textures and tomorrow it's 3D modeling and the next day you're sketching an image, then you want to be at a small team where everybody wears lots of hats. So there's kind of both opportunities out there for sure.
Yeah, and the same goes for programming though, right, too? Like where I'm at right now, we have 6 people. So there's only 2 programmers. And so the programmers are doing all the networking, they're doing all the game code, they're doing back end, they're doing everything.
And 6 people, right, Pizza?
Yeah.
Yeah. So after NetDevil, we tried a company called In Games. We thought, we've always done these massively multiplayer games, and there are these teams of 100 plus people, and they take 4 or 5 years, and everybody's just burned out by the end. Let's try some mobile stuff. And we did all right, but it just, nobody's heart was in it, right? Like it was none of our passions to make those games. So I don't even remember how long did In Games even last, like a year, something like that. And then after that, I started
Bounce the Bunny, right? Is that the Bounce the Bunny?
No, that's is that In Game? Yeah. And then after that, I started a company called Wyrmbyte, and we did some online stuff, and then I did a big Hawaii game where we put a bunch of time in. We finished that last October, and then now I'm doing a space game again. Very much in the vein of my very first game, Jumpgate. It's just something I'm working on my own. So Wyrmbyte is a company of one right now.
So with your space game, again, Scott, I want you to talk a little bit more about that before I start asking some specific questions that I think that, parents of kids who are, talking about this. And Jumpgate, so from an animation standpoint, Pizza, I mean, again, you guys had some cutting edge art that you were doing from that perspective, but Scott, from a programming standpoint, you had this whole economy and a physics engine, right? And so the skill sets required for that piece, in terms of understanding how to code and create a physics engine and a persistent universe, so that when I log out and log back in, all the minerals that I'd mined on this asteroid or traded with somebody is still there and available to me, right? And so there's almost like this crypto before crypto was even there in game, right? So you guys did a lot of cutting edge stuff that was way ahead of its time, right? Sometimes that's an issue when you're too far ahead of your time, and I think that's what Jumpgate was. So can you guys both talk to me just in terms of the graphics that are there? We were involved with that whole thing, and then making Pizza making the graphics, adhere to the physics engine that's underneath as well. Can you guys talk about that a little bit, and the education and thought behind you needing to be in the industry to deal with that type of thing?
Yeah, so I'll go really quick because the art side of it is really short. Like the technology back then for the 3D engine was really low. Like the spaceships were 300 polys, right? And I had a space station that was like 5,000 polys, and Scott and Steve were like, "Can you make it a little bit lower?" So the technologies and the amount of memory, texture memory space we were allowed to use was just, it was ridiculously low for what we were doing. If you really want to know what Jumpgate was about, the back end of it, like the physics engine and the networking, to me, the networking was unbelievable. And the prediction engines that Scott and Steve came up with, because that was not being done anywhere else at that time.
Brilliant. And by the way, it was beautiful, even for its time though, Pizza, just again, before we go over to Scott, it was a beautiful game, guys. I mean, that's part of the appeal and the allure, right? I mean, you're in this whole space, and the actual jump gates, when you jump through that jump gate itself, everything was beautiful. But again, Pizza, I want to turn it over to Scott, just the engines behind that whole thing, and just the thought and the programming and the math, so Scott, go ahead, talk to us about that.
Sure. So the first thing to keep in mind is what you would do today to start a game is you could go look online, and there's groups and there's places. There was nothing like that. Like there was no resources. Like we had to figure everything out on our own. And so every task, like, how do you program a joystick, right? How do you talk to and we were on modems at the time too, right? Like, so we had like super fast internet connections. And so, I mean, it was every single step. We didn't know, like I didn't, when Peter was making his ships, I had to write an exporter from 3D Studio.
Yeah.
Because there was no, like those didn't even exist yet.
Right.
And so we had to figure out, like, how do you even get the information out and into the game? And so, I mean, it took us 5 years, but it was just, it was exciting, right? Like every day was like, what's this new hurdle and how are we going to overcome this? And at the time, Steve, our other partner, he was really like the math like genius behind it all. I feel like my math skills have improved in the last few decades, but Steve was the real math genius that, like, I would work all week and I would store up a bunch of problems that I didn't know how to solve. And then Steve would come over to my house on Saturdays and we would just rip through all the math issues that I had, basically. And he would just kind of help me figure them all out. And so that's kind of how we worked for a while before we had an office or anything like that.
Yeah.
Because Peter was doing stuff at nights and Steve was doing stuff on weekends. And that's kind of how we got started with it. As far as math, like the math of games there's a lot of like matrix algebra, linear algebra stuff, vectors and rotations and that kind of thing. And then there's a lot of trig. Trig is probably the one thing that you really want to know if you're going to be a programmer, because everything is kind of a triangle, and so anytime you're doing anything, like I want to put a camera over this map, how do I know where the camera is or how to position the map? It's always drawing a triangle and figuring out the angles. And so just knowing basic trig. And the nice thing about programming is you don't have to know how to do the equations. You just have to know what the equations do, if that makes sense. Like, how is it useful to know a cross product or a dot product or an arc sign or whatever it is? Like, as long as you know how you're going to use those things, you don't have to code that math anymore. You just have to understand that, like,
How to
There's a
leverage it.
solution for what you want to do. Yeah.
Right. I want to point out here too now that it's very, you were talking about stuff like 20, 30 years ago,
Yeah.
right? A lot of the games that are done now are done with engines, and they're cookie cutters. Like if you look at like the Far Cry games, right? They all have a very similar, and the Assassin's Creed games, they all have a pretty much the same game mechanic with just a little bit of different artwork in it, and the gameplay's pretty much the same. So you don't necessarily, even if you are not into too much of that coding side, which, you know, writing 3D engines and stuff, a lot of it, if you're going into a company that's using these pre-cookie cutter engines, you don't really have to know much about that either. There's a lot of room for people who want to be game designers and writers and artists and all kinds of stuff.
Writers.
Something funny.
Go ahead, Scott. No,
I'm just gonna, something you reminded me of when you were talking at the beginning about kids' parents not being gamers. We had one guy we hired, and his mom calls, and she says, "Is this real?" Oh, so
That's
good.
hilarious. That's hilarious.
Yeah, so we had to assure that yes, video games were real companies, and we actually paid people, and that kind of stuff. So it was funny.
And now the video game industry is bigger than the movie industry.
I was just
it's going to be further. I mean, you look at, we're going to get into politics and our situation right now, but with COVID, people are playing more games and doing more online stuff. And they can't afford or they can't go make movies anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's difficult to take a team of 100 people to go make a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Pizza and Scott, you're exactly right. So I have an article, that I found online for 2019, and basically if you combine the music and the movie industry together, the video game industry far surpasses both of those combined, right? Yeah. And Pizza, you kind of touched on something as well, right? There's a whole story. There's an art in terms of telling a story. In terms of gaming as well. So writers is another avenue into the video game industry as well. So a couple of things I want you guys just to kind of talk about in terms of just all the different facets that the video industry touches and employs people on. And then what would you tell parents, or I guess people who are wanting to get into the industry to study? If you're in college, what do you recommend them studying? Because I'm going to imagine that there's still some very valuable, skills that you learn in getting, going into the fine arts, right? As well. And then Scott, in terms of programming, and then programming too, programs, what are you guys currently using in both of your companies? So go ahead. I'll let you guys go.
I can start with art for you, because really, I may be different than most art directors, but maybe not. Like, the value of an artist to me is not the software that they know, it's the quality of the art. And you can learn software and you can learn different programs. People sometimes have more towards a bent towards concept artwork, or they might be more of an animator, they might be like doing 3D work. I mean, there's so many different facets of where they want to fall. But if in terms of what software and what avenue or direction they want to go in the game industry, but the quality of the artwork is paramount. And to do that, you need to have an art degree, or, I'll backtrack. You don't have to have an art degree. You have to be a strong artist, and you have to have a portfolio that represents good quality artwork. I never hired anybody without looking at their art, without looking at their portfolwant
And when you look at their portfolio, Pizza, you want to see a handmade part. Oh, you want to see everything, digital and okay, gotcha.
I want to see that you sketch and you draw and you paint and use Photoshop and other ways, techniques of doing stuff. And then I want to see if you do have experience doing animation or 3D sculpture, or you're good at Maya or Autodesk or whatever it is, then I want to see that as well. But I do also look at the quality of the just the raw artwork that you do.
Perfect.
And because don't forget, you've got UI artists, UX artists. There's like so many different types of artists that are needed in video games these days. It's not just, can you model something, or can you?
So for parents who and people who may be watching that are less technical, UI is user interface, right? And UX is user experience, and okay. So Pizza, real quick before we cut over to Scott, to programs. I mean, current programs and then up and coming programs that you recommend people be familiar with.
You need to be familiar with the Adobe Suite, basically for all the 2D stuff. If you want to be getting more into the production side of things, then knowing a 3D engine is helpful, but not necessarily. So something like Unity, Epic's engine, or whatever, a Far Cry engine, a Crytek or whatever it's called. Those don't really matter, but it's important that you understand how your graphics get implemented. So a little bit of background on that is good. There's no point you handing over a drawing, right? You can't just hand over a black and white drawing.
Can't just scan that in and make it work.
So you need a little bit of understanding, but really it's the Photoshop suite. If you're going to do 3D, it's Maya or Max these days. And then if you want to do really high-end sculpts, then it's ZBrush. And then if you want to do get really good at painting and painting models, then it's Substance Painter these days. So.
Mr. Brown, Scott.
So I'll add on what Peter said too, just because now I'm going through my kids learning this stuff.
Right.
Really good free art programs. So there's a Photoshop like clone called GIMP that you can even change its keys to be the same as Photoshop keys and stuff like that. So that's a really great way to learn Photoshop for free without having to pay. And then Blender is a great free 3D app. Yeah. And so if you're looking for like just getting started and you want to do something, because like what Peter's talking about are the tools that all the professionals use. And so knowing those is obviously important for getting a job, but for getting started, Blender might be a good starting art.
And free, right? So the Photoshop suite is, and I pay that monthly subscription myself. By the way, my son Isaiah started in Blender and GIMP as well. So I mean, and they're free, right? But they're not cost prohibitive, right? And so, which is another thing too that I want to kind of talk on when we get into the social aspect, that we'll get started here in a minute because we're at the bottom of the hour. But again, in terms of just inner city, right? So kids who don't necessarily have access to computers, that's another great programs, GIMP and Blender that you can get started in, right? But keep going, Scott. I want you to keep going and
sure. So when I hired people, my number one, the thing I was looking for more than anything was passion. The games industry is not a 9-to-5 job, right? Like it's got to be something you really want to do, right? And so that was something I always looked for in people. Like I was more willing to train up, you know what I mean? So long as you had that passion. The other thing I would tell any aspiring game developer is that, because I think the biggest misconception is people are like, I have a great game idea and I'm going to take it to a company. Ideas are mostly worthless.
Yes.
And so that's something everyone thinks they have a great idea, right? And so it's way better to make anything. Like Peter said, like use Unreal, use Unity. There's other engines too that you can use for free, but like go make something, because that's going to show me a lot more than like if you have a game design document, like that's nice, but like it's like the hardest job to get in our industry is a designer, because it's a thing that everybody thinks they're a designer. You know what I mean? And so, and design position has that chicken and the egg problem, right? Like you're not going to get a job until you've proven you're a designer. And so how you kind of get in the door. And so for a lot of designers, they get in the door as like a tester, like a beta tester, right? Is another kind of way into the industry. But I would say anybody who wants to get in, make a game. That's the best thing you can do. And now with the new tools, you don't have to, like a programmer can make a game on their own and an artist can make a game on their own. You don't, like to make a truly great game, yes, you have to have experts in all those fields, but anybody with any skill set can make a game. And there's just the tutorials on, you could just fire up YouTube and find a tutorial of like, hey, I want to make a Pac-Man game, or I want to make a
Blender guru, right? We talked about Blender, right? Yeah, exactly.
And so you can get online and, like, again, the big difference, like we would be like, all right, how does this networking even work? Now it's just like, here's a 10-minute guide to make a network game, right? Like an even simpler thing that one of my kids does is Roblox. Roblox has this, you just get in and build online multiplayer games, and that really simple scripting. I mean, and in 10 minutes you have a multiplayer game, and you can be running around and seeing your friends in there, and like it's pretty neat. So you know, I would say if that's what you want to do, that's the best thing you can do is make something. The other thing is you might realize like, I want to be a programmer, and then you start programming and you're like, I hate programming, you know what I mean, or whatever, right? And so making a game is a good way to sort of see if this is something you think would be a good career, like if you do think it would be fun.
You know, I was just looking today, actually. I keep getting these notices from this game. I think this company called Astrofish or something, and they sell 3D art ready to go in Unity for like 10 or 20 bucks. Yeah. And it can build a whole, so it builds you a whole RPG village. So if you're just a designer or a programmer, you can buy the artwork for nothing.
Correct.
Right, or vice versa. If you're an artist and you don't know the programming, you can get you can buy plugins that will do all of the special effects programming.
You can sell your art to that company, right? I mean, is that a potential option?
Oh yeah, there's people that do that earn a living just on selling. It's like Craigslist almost, right? You sell pieces of code, you sell snippets of code that are plugins for Epic's engine or for Unity engine.
And all that marketplace is cheap, as Peter said, right? Like you can buy a programming script that's like, oh, you know, I want a radial menu in my game. You know, if you're familiar with that, like you push the controller and it comes up in a circle and you push in the direction to pick the thing. Like that sounds reasonably complicated. You can buy a demo of that for $5.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And just drop it into your game or whatever, right? So it's, and if you don't want to buy it, someone made a YouTube video again, like how you do one of these, you know? And so, I mean, that's kind of a good way to learn. Like, even if you don't know what the code means while you're typing it in, you're still learning it. And you're like, oh, I see, this section of code does this thing. Even if I don't quite understand how yet, you know, you can just kind of get in there and do it. So
but Scott and Pizza, so I want to go back to that because everything is just kind of, you know, easily accessible or very cheaply accessible, right? But that brings me back to the point of what makes some good video games or a good video game is the content and the mechanics behind what you're trying to accomplish, right? So your current game, Scott, Jumpgate was very complex in terms of what you had to do. And I don't want to get, you know, steal your thunder here, but you're trying to do something a little bit different. But I think having a compelling storyline and gameplay is almost more important than, you know, having access to the cheap code or the cheap graphics an engine that you can get. Would you agree with that or no?
Yeah, so the double-edged sword of super easy tools and super cheap assets is that there's millions of games.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so how do you stand out in that world? And so this is a little more of like, you know, game design or even like trying to create like a, you know, a business, you know, document, right? Like you need to know like, what is this thing you're making? How is it going to stand out? Like if you're truly treating it like a business, like it's one thing to build something to learn it for fun and for a demo, but if you're trying to actually make money off of a product, it's very, very, very hard to make money. And you've got to have a reason, like what are you bringing to the market that is different than everything else that's out there, right? And so as an example with my space game, I'm making it very different than what I made before because there's modern versions of what I made before out there. Right. You know, some of them, like Star Citizen, has a budget of almost $400 million, right? So it's like, that's not, anything I do will never stack up to that, right? And so you need to kind of find what's your little
niche
slice. Yeah, exactly. How are you going to stand out? And so if you're actually trying to make it a business, that's something you got to think about.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Pizza.
I just want to say one thing. What we're talking about here, though, is if you're making your own game, right? And I think if you are just a kid that's wanting to get into the gaming industry, you don't necessarily have to think about those things.
Correct.
You have to think about what Scott was saying earlier, which is, do you have a passion for it? And is it something that you are really, really interested in? Because I will say it is hugely competitive because everybody wants to get into video games.
Yep.
They think this industry chews people up and spits them out like really quickly because, and so if you don't have that passion for either programming or art or storytelling or game design or whatever, it's probably not for you.
And you guys spend a lot of hours. I mean, a lot of late nights. And I remember beta testing with you guys for Jumpgate on your various games as well too. And as well, after we put in a full day's work, we're in.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Scott.
Probably too much hours.
All right.
I was going to say, I actually think it's probably true of all entertainment industries that they're passion-driven industries, and they're going to be really, really hard, but the payoff is huge, right? Like if you love what you're doing, the satisfaction of seeing what you built is just, it's incredible, you know? And so I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead, Pizza.
I think the industry's changed a little bit in terms of the hours as well.
Yeah.
At least for me and my company, we try to be very realistic about deadlines and budgets, etc. And I do know that the last couple of companies were very cognizant of that. But you still hear stories. I mean, who was it that just got into trouble recently? The Assassin's Creed crew, and EA has been in trouble for working people too much, and so, yeah.
So, gentlemen, real quick before we transition into some of the economic and social things that are going on, salaries. Give me some salary bands starting out for kids that are coming out of school, right? Because they're competing with the Microsoft, the Amazons, and everything too, right? You know, again, entry level coming out of college. I mean, I'm assuming that it's still going to be somewhat on par, depending on the size of the company potentially. But again, you guys have fed your families, you know, for the past 25, 30 years, right? So you can make a living doing it.
Yeah, I'll go first again because mine will be shorter because art generally doesn't get paid as well as programming. I think if you're a starting artist, intern artist, you're probably going to end up earning more than a teacher. You're going to be in like 40s, 50s. And as soon as you start going up the ranks within a couple of years, you can be at 70 to 100 grand easily. Yeah. Especially if you're in some high tech areas. You know, in San Francisco, and you know, eventually, as senior artists, you can be in six figures, or art directors and stuff. And if you become really good at it, and you're a well sought after artist, like there are some concept artists that, they can make millions of dollars just doing the concept work for a video game.
It's got to be the passion piece, though, that gets you to that level at a certain point, right?
You just have to be really good.
And skill.
Okay. All right, there you go.
Yeah, you've got to be a well sought after artist to get those. So like I do know that a couple of artists that I have worked with in the past and know acquaintances of, but so like Scott will remember the concept artist on ArenaNet. He gets paid a fortune to go in and do concept work for video games. And this Sparth is another one that set the tone for some of the Quake and Halo games, right? Like those guys make top dollar, and they also moved over to the movie industry as well. So they do concept work for, some of them have moved over to do concept work for Star Wars. So
video game industry is even driving movies, right, being made now too. So Scott, I want you to kind of answer that and talk to that from a technical standpoint, if you don't mind.
Sure. So just a couple different jobs. So testers usually are hourly, you know, and that probably starts in the $10 an hour kind of a range, you know. And then designers is also, if you don't have experience, it's a very low paying job, right? You're probably starting in 30s. And same with like an assistant producer, you know, like you don't have any production skill, maybe you don't even have a degree in production yet, you know, same thing, that's going to be a pretty low paying job. However, if you're one of the top designers in the industry, you're probably one of the highest paid people in the industry, right? So design probably has the greatest range of pay. And then conversely, programming might have the smallest range of pay, because programmers start, like, programming is just, it's one of those positions that almost every company is looking for programmers all the time. Like, it's just one of those positions, and it's not just game companies, right? And then you're
commoditized.
Yeah, you're competing with, you know, Silicon Valley companies start most of their engineers at 100 plus, right? Now, obviously, it's much more expensive to live in San Francisco, but
used to be.
yeah, maybe not anymore. But so, you know, programming it's probably the highest pay, and it's also probably the safest job. Like, if you're a programmer, there's work. You can live in any state, there's work, right? Like, that's just, it's the most in demand job, where game designer is probably the hardest, I would say, job to land at a game company, if you're thinking about it. But, you know, great programmers make, I would say, 200,000 plus is probably like what the really good. And then, but separate from that, like any business owners is where the most money is going to always be, right? Like, that's just how it is. Like, no matter what your skills are, running the business and taking the risks and then making the profits is where the most money will always be. But it comes at risk.
Yes, high risk.
Yeah.
High risk. So, gentlemen, I think that's wonderful, and you've given some solid numbers again. So parents who are thinking that, you know, like the mom who called and said, "Is this real?" Right? I think there's still parents who have that, you know, mentality out there, right?
Yeah.
It is very, very real. And as I mentioned earlier, it's bigger than the movie and music business combined, right? So, and these guys just gave you some salaries, you know, some spectrums for you to consider. So support your kids to, you know, go for that passion. Go ahead, Pizza.
I was just going to say, it is still a volatile industry, though. The video game companies go up and down very quickly on failed products, right? So whilst there are lots of jobs out there, there might be a lot of moving around in the first years of your experience.
So funding is probably something that, if you're looking at a company, right, Peter and Scott, in terms of what you might want to consider, right? If you're being bootstrapped and, you know, there's a huge pile of competition out there for that same vertical that you're going for, maybe, you know, something to consider. But if you're going for something that Scott talked about that's unique and well funded, maybe you take a swing. I don't know. What do you think?
So something that is interesting that hasn't changed a lot, even from stuff you ran into with Formula, is that, again, there's all these programmers out there, and artists and everything else. But I could also go to China and pay a programmer $1,000 a month, right?
Right.
And so, I mean, you guys ran into that with the web business back then, and it's still true now, right? There's cheaper parts of the industry, and there's a lot of people, like, there's sites where you can just put a little RFP, like, I need a function that does this thing. I can't figure it out. And programmers from all over the world will bid on it, and they'll come back with bids that are in the hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
You know, and it's maybe weeks worth of work, right? And so it's still just as tricky. You know, if you're going to try to do it at American rates, it's a harder sell. And so it's one more piece of it all that you have to think about.
But you know what, though? You can get laid off in industry, as is being proven out here, right? I mean,
I don't know that anything's safe anymore.
It's not.
Who'd have thought being a waitress would be a
right. Right. Nothing's a sure bet. So I think following your passion, as both of you mentioned, is probably just sound advice, right? So it's something that you want to do, whether you're getting paid for it or not, is a good starting point, you know. So gentlemen, we have 10 minutes left before we all want to go over and root for our Denver Nuggets, right? To you know, take it and knock the Clippers out, and we'll spend the last couple of minutes talking about that. But so economically, we're talking about that a little bit. So I don't want to, you know, delve too much into that, right? And nothing's a sure bet, right? We talked about the failure of my company, and there's that risk out there for anything. You know, Scott, I think you summed it up beautifully in terms of just what that potentially could look like, right? But socially, you know, you two have been, obviously you're two white men, you know, who, you know, are upwardly in the socioeconomic standards of things for all intents and purposes. But you've had this passion and been very outspoken about what you're seeing in America as it pertains to, you know, what's happening in the Black community, and you being disturbed and in terms of police brutality. So I just want to get a little bit of insight in terms of, you know, your perspective. It's one thing for me as a Black guy saying, hey, stop killing me, right? You know, I don't want to, you know, deal with that, right? But there's so many people who are in support of what's going on, which is, again, what's heartbreaking and shocking. I just want to hear a little bit, you know, about your perspectives in the last couple of minutes here. And Peter, you and I had this chance, and Scott, you were on that thread too, just the dialogue in terms of, you know, Peter, you grew up back when, you know, in England, when, you know, England and Ireland were, you know, feuding and having some really bloody, you know, battles, you know, in terms of religion, right? So I just want to give you guys both a couple of minutes to just kind of talk about where we currently are and what your hopes are and you know, your thoughts are real quick, because I think we're at a critical turning point in this country and in the world. So go ahead, I'll turn it over to you both.
You want me to go first this time, Peter?
Whatever.
All right. So, I mean, I have a bunch of thoughts, but don't pretend to be an expert at all. But so some of the things I feel like I've learned is, for one, like a good thing I feel like many people could hear is that racism isn't a binary. You're not racist or not. It's a spectrum. And you know, it's the word has this super negative connotation, and people, especially white people, get very defensive when you call them racist. And I think what we need to do better is be able to hear why is someone saying this about you, right? And it's not necessarily about you, it's perhaps about an action, you know, and then, you know, but it's hard to hear, right? But you have to listen, and you have to be willing to say, you know what, I am racist. You know, I don't feel like I'm here, but I know I'm also not here, and I can be better, and I can improve. And I think that's something I think we could all do a better job of. And then, not to go too long, but I mean, I think when you talk about like systemic racism, I feel like it's a real problem, but it's hard to address when you have so many people who deny the reality of it, right? You know, and there's so many examples of every single step along the way, right? Like, if you're a Black man in America, what you have to overcome, like, before the police show up, there's profiling, and there's people calling the cops on people for having picnics, and like, even before you get into the legal system, there's this systemic racism of just, you assume something worse from somebody, right? And then when the police get involved, I mean, we've all seen all the horrible videos and the shots in the back, right? And knees on the neck, and it's just, it's disgusting, and it's horrible, right? And then you have jury problems and jury selection problems, and you have, I mean, just every single step of the way, it's stacked against you as African American in America, right? And it's something, it kills me to see, and it's something I wish, because there's so many people I know who don't believe it. They don't think it exists, and so they don't think there's anything to fix. You know what I mean? And it's
that
like,
says it right there. Yeah.
I feel like the first step, if we're going to really fix this as America, you know, instead of just one side of us believing one thing, and, you know, we're very tribal right now, right? Like, we're very much into our sides, and we hate the other side. And it's like, if we're ever going to get together, we have to all acknowledge this one basic fact. Like, it's real. It's everywhere. It's in everything you do. I don't have the answer of how we get there, though. You know, I wish
we're
I
talking
did.
about it. We're talking about it, and you
Yeah.
acknowledging it, I think, is a very good start. And the fact that you're saying that there's people who don't believe it still, right?
Yeah,
you know, so I
there
think
are.
that was such a critical comment. Peter, go ahead. I want you to weigh in also.
I absolutely think it's disgusting. I grew up in England, and I'm not going to say there's not racism there, because there is, and there's violence happens. But America, to me, it's been a hard transition for me to become an American, because I have a U.S. passport, but there are certain things in alien and inalienable rights that people have, right? That is somehow taken for granted in this country because of the way this country was formed in terms of the pioneer, like that whole thing. Like, I have the right to be who I am, and I have the right to own a gun, and I have all, like, I have this, like, there's this almost this systemic problem, I believe, in the way this country is set up, that they don't believe in any kind of socialism or equal rights, because it's every man for himself. That's the core of what America seems to be from an outsider's perspective. And so I believe that a lot of the issues with racism in this country stem from that belief that, like, it's almost taken that belief to its extreme. And we as a society, if you're going to live in it, you owe that society, right? There has to be some payback. I think you and I had a long dialogue about this, and I think until we address that bigger picture as well, things are not going to change, because the police brutality kinds of stuff is just, look, in England, we don't have guns. How many times do you hear of someone running away from a scene and getting shot in England? It's because the police don't carry guns. Right. They don't have to. They'll catch up with him and they'll get him in a different way, or they'll find him a different way, right? Like, it's that idea that you have the right to take someone's life because they broke the law, whether it be stealing a loaf of bread, or you were walking around with an AK-47, then okay, you're going to get shot. But like, for an individual to get shot because they were doing a minor drug deal is unbelievably asinine. That's the only way I can say it. That doesn't happen in European countries.
So interesting. So I've never been a gun owner until, this year. And I think I posted on social media that I did purchase one. Number one, I am truly interested in competition shooting. It's just something that I can do as an old man, potentially, in my age bracket, But I got to tell you, just with what's going on and what I'm seeing, being perpetrated by the armed law enforcement, I didn't get one for that reason, but I think people are becoming so much more emboldened in terms of their rhetoric and things. And I actually do have concern about people coming to my house, I've never had that before. I've always felt like, we can go, I'm pretty confident walking into most rooms that I'm 99% of the time going to handle my business without a weapon. But this current environment though, I'm just like, I don't know. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, this turned into a little bit of discussion about guns, I guess. But really, if you want to get back to the Black Lives Matter thing, like, I can't comprehend it. Like, I can't wrap my head around it sometimes that it exists to such the systemic level that it does, and it does. There's no denying it, and it just disgusts me. And I like Scott, I don't know how to fix it. When I see it, I point it out. I point it out to my kids. I point it out to friends. I've pointed it out to family. I've unfriended people over it, and I wish I could do more. I
think those are starting points, though, Pete. I really do.
Yeah.
So here's what I want to end on, right? Something positive. We're at the top of the hour, and thank you, gentlemen. I think this is what you've shared today, on all aspects, is, I think, hopefully going to be invaluable to, again, those parents and kid conversations. I think truly, truly helpful. But one of the things that I'm proud of the NBA is just them supporting their players in being outspoken about it, right? And using their platform and having the freedom to protest games, and I've had to unfriend people because they're complaining that they can't watch the game and they're criticizing these millionaire athletes. I, for one, as a black guy, am happy and proud that they're doing this. These young millionaire guys who they have more to lose than, I do, and the same, thing to lose in terms of their lives, right? So I applaud them. I applaud the league for supporting it, the owners as well. And so let's talk about our Nuggets here. I want to get a prediction here before we go, because I think the tide has turned. I think I saw the Clippers look in their eyes. They were disheartened that last game, and I think the Nuggets might hurt some feelings tonight. What do you guys think?
So it all, to me, it all comes down to Murray. Like,
Yes.
Joker is consistent. Murray has taken his game to a new level this year.
Yes.
To where when he's playing good, he's playing at like a Jordan Iverson
He's
playoffs level.
That spin move dunk over playoff P was incredible that last game, right?
He shot 75% for threes the other day. Like he was over 50 points, but under 25 shots. Like usually when guys are a ton of points, it's like they're shooting all the time, right? So to me, it comes down to Murray, because I feel like the Clippers guys, Leonard and George, have been also consistent.
Yeah.
And so to me, the difference of the Nuggets winning and the Nuggets losing is their shooting. Mm-hmm. And so I think it just, we'll see. Like, they've played with everything on the line so many times. Like, I do feel like they're the team coming in on house money, right? They're relaxed, they're laughing, they're having fun.
Freewheeling,
yeah. And if you're the Clippers, it's like, we've never made it to the finals, and you're right there, and are you going to blow it? And I can imagine, I don't follow their media, but I can imagine people are freaking out.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think everybody had preordained it was going to be the LA championship, Lakers against the Clippers, all this kind of stuff. And so it's kind of fun to be the underdog.
Yeah, for
messing
sure.
all that up or whatever, So I think the Nuggets are good. We'll see, maybe like the young guys, like Michael Porter Jr. is so exciting. And these guys they're babies, man.
Right. They all are. Yeah.
And of all sports, I think the NBA is a sport where you kind of you have to earn, you kind of earn your way through the playoffs, right? Like, like everybody, you have to kind of the Bulls, they were beaten up by the Pistons until they finally overcame them or whatever, right? And so everybody's got that team they overcome or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that the Nuggets are at that. They've sort of earned.
They're getting there though.
But for me, this is all icing, right? For me too, right? Because this is all experience for all these guys.
Yes.
And, oh man, I love watching them play. The other thing that makes me proud is I feel like this is a homegrown team. We drafted these guys. We didn't buy these players, and bring them in from all over and do what everybody else is doing right now, right?
Yeah.
The Nuggets are a homegrown team. I think Millsap is the only big.
And he was even mid-level star, right? I mean, he wasn't even like that superstar when he came over. So
and I think that's about mostly we built this team ourselves, and so
that's good. Peter.
I'm an Englishman. I can't really tell you much about basketball. I've only followed it since I've been over here, so it's not ingrained. But I have been watching them this year and last year a little bit because my daughters are really one of them is really into basketball. So
really,
So I think what Scott said about Murray is really critical, but I also think that I've noticed that they not only when he's not playing well, all the other shooters don't shoot well either. So the Grant, the Harris, and Porter, they start missing their 3-pointers and their layups and stuff as well. And so it's like, once he starts to not play well, it seems like everybody else follows suit. So they need the other guys to actually, you need to be able to throw it out and get some of those guys shooting as well and putting them in.
I agree. I think my final take on this is I think the Joker is the bigger issue. Murray's going to get his points, I believe, and again, when he falters, the team is going to falter, but Jokic has to knock down those open jumpers and he has to facilitate, in terms of passing out from that big position. And when he does that and hits guys in their spots and in their sweet spots, I think that's when the team wins consistently. So, I'm pulling for him either way. I think there's a lot of pieces here and I'm pulling for him and hope they, like I said, hurt some feelings. So, gentlemen, Man, love you guys. You guys are awesome for spending this time and sharing some valuable information. And we got to do this more often. Maybe we'll get together and do that sports podcast we've been talking about too. So
that'd be fun.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks,
All right.
guys.
Gentlemen, thank you
Take care,
guys.
Paul.
Have a good
Great to
evening.
see you,
Love
man.
to your families. We'll see you.
Yeah, you
Bye.
too. All right, bye.
Yeah.